What's up again, everybody? I just had the absolute pleasure of hanging out with Dexter, the battle-hardened Portland winner, on none other than Viserai, the OG Rune Blade himself. He went a complete undefeated, I believe it was 10-0 this past weekend, and so he sat down with me and talked to me all the way through his deck, which is a very meticulously thought out and planned and tweaked deck list. So if you're looking for how to play Viserai, this is a great video for you. And if you'd like the entire full written guide for this, all written down so you can follow it at an event, feel free to head on over to patreon.com/DMArmada, where that is posted in 2 different forms. So let's go ahead and get into it. So let's go ahead and jump in and explain the hero and the weapon that you've chosen. Of course, Viserai is the hero, so we'll talk through him, and then we'll dive into your equipment, just kind of like blast through it. Your equipment suite is actually really easy to understand, which I think is great for newer players to pick up.
Yeah, I think so.
And then from that point, you've broken this deck into 2 different sections as far as the main board is concerned, and I love the way that you explained it to me just a moment ago, so I hope everyone enjoys that as well. But let's start with good old Viserai Rune Blood. Do you want to walk us through the hero himself?
Sure. So, yeah, Viserai, the non-talented Runeblade hero from Arcane Rising, and his hero power is whenever you play a Runeblade card, if you have played another non-attack action that turn, you create a rune chant token. You can effectively think about this as all of your Runeblade cards have +1 damage. And that, I think, explains a lot of why Viserai is a really strong aggro hero in this meta, because you're playing cards that are ostensibly on rate, and all of a sudden now they're actually just +1. You know, people talk about Revel and Runeblood, 0 for 4, go again. That's a great rate, but 0 for 5, go again? Now you're like way above the power curve.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've literally never thought of it that way, but I mean, that's a really good way to consider why just creating rune chants, and you stack on top of that that it's split damage, and that makes
split damage.
Yeah,
people
even
have
more
to play the
difficult,
AB
right?
tax into you. They can't, you know, Briar, sometimes you'd be like, well, they're gonna deal like 5. I'm probably not blocking on Thorn Swings anyway. Viserai, like, if you want to block at all, you have to play the AB one. And there's a, you know, a certain number of cards, they do actually interact with the rune chants being tokens that exist on the field. So I think someone's done the math. Rune chants are worth like closer to like 1.4 damage instead of 1. I don't know that math, but I've seen other people talk about it.
And you mentioned the Rosetta Thorn, and we might as well talk about it. Rosetta Thorn is the weapon of choice for basically every Runeblade ever at this point.
Yep, certainly a lot of discussion as to whether this weapon is too good. If you ask me, I think it is just good enough, but it's a great weapon. It plays exactly into your game plan as a Runeblade. You want to be playing non-attacks and attacks, and it's 1 resource for 4 damage. You can just insert it cleanly at the end of your combat chain. No consideration really for any of the other Runeblade weapons in the pool.
And it shows in your list because it's the only weapon that you actually run. There's no reason to swap, right? Break us down the main board equipment. You start with Crown of Providence, which is just a house in this format.
Yep. So you start with Crown. It is 2 block, 1 time. Very important. Stopping hit triggers. Very important for just keeping protecting your life total. And the big thing, though, I kind of appreciate it when this card got spoiled, but now playing with it a ton, I really appreciate it. The sink below text, you know, functionally it's sink below. Like, you arsenal a good card and you draw 4 reds and you're like, oh, I don't have a good play with this hand. You just block with Crown, maybe you put your arsenal, maybe you put another card from your hand, you draw blue, suddenly the hand's great. First and foremost, you're trying to be the aggressor, you're trying to get your opponent to want to block you. And get their life total reduced as fast as you can. And being able to sort of keep your foot on the gas through a weird hand is incredibly important.
And interestingly enough, you run exclusively almost Aether Ironweave as your chest equipment. Tell us about that and why you do that.
It's a similar sort of vein we saw for that brief period there where Stubbies was not banned. The Phi decks were running like Heartbreed of Spring or Best of the First Fist because they didn't care about trying to get 1 resource every 3 turns off a tunic. They just needed the 1 resource that enabled the power turn. It enables some really powerful turns to really sort of keep the pressure on. Primary example being able to end your combat chain with like a Command and Conquer instead of the normal Thorn Swing, because you just use your Iron Weave for the 1 or 2 extra resources. Again, you're an aggro deck. Your games usually don't go long enough to really need the consistent resource gain that Tunic would provide you.
Grasp is just a shoe-in, right? I mean, you literally have it there because it does everything you could ever want in a Rune Blade, like gloves.
Pretty much. Vexing Quillhands 2 Rune Chance on demand is nice. A lot less nice without Pledge Sea Skeleton. And so, Grasp of the Arknight, unless you have a good reason to not run it, it's there. It's 3 block, which is, again, huge, stopping on hits. It's very good if you ever get down to the really grindy endgame situations. You pitch 1 blue to create a Rune Chant, swing your Thorn for 2 and 1. If they're out 1, that's getting 2 cards. It's an incredible piece of equipment. You really do need a good reason to not run Grasp.
Right now there's just not one. It's literally the best case scenario, I think, across the board for the most part, right?
Yep, pretty much.
Spellbound Creepers in this deck does have some utility for the effect. Are you using it specifically for the effect, or just because it's like kind of that same sort of thing where it's basically just one of the best slots, or one of the best things that occupies the slot?
It is basically one of the best things that you can put in the leg slot on Viserai and kind of Rune Blades in general. But the joke I've been making to people is Spellbound Creepers are basically actually just Iron Rot legs plus in really this deck. Viserai does not have a hero power that lets him get go again, so you play a significant number of cards that his entire purpose is giving go again to your attack. You end up with a lot less hands where you like need to activate Spellbound Creepers in order to be able to attack with multiple things. So I don't use these that often for their effect. A lot of the times they're just Iron Rot legs, but they're an incredible safety valve. It's sort of like, Dorinthia, they play Refraction Bolters for when they need to swing twice, but they didn't draw a go again a card for their Dawnblade. Same sort of thing here. It can bail you out right when you need it.
From this point on, you have some sideboard equipment, so like Crown of Dichotomy, you have Vexing Quillhand. Both of those have Arcane Barrier. Are those simply for Arcane Barrier matchups?
Yes, and Quillhand's actually sort of the first one you go to. Crown of Dichotomy is only for Wizards.
Okay.
And then if I'm playing the Viserai Mirror, that's where Quillhand comes in. However, it's only if I go second. We're now on in the Viserai Mirror. If you end up going first, you just run Crown and Grasp, and you just don't bother blocking Rune Chance. You run AB 1 off of Quillhand if you go second, because you don't want them to draw a hand that lets them just like deal you 5 damage turn 1, because you don't have Arcane Barrier.
Yeah, that makes sense. It puts you too far behind if you go second. That's a really good point, though. The idea that you're only bringing something like that in when you're going second, because after you roll off, you do get to make changes from that point.
Yep. Yeah, you're supposed to roll to determine who goes first before you make any sideboard choices, and it matters in several different points with the sideboard decisions of this deck.
Does it matter for Tunic here? Does that actually affect it, or do you just run Tunic for like slower matchups?
Tunic is for slower matchups. I think in this meta, it's funny, Bravo's sped up a ton considering where he was like a year ago. I think it's pretty much only Oldhim is where Tunic matters. But Oldhim is the type of deck, they're going to try to block you out. They're going to try to run you out of threats. Tunic lets you do more powerful turns more consistently. You will need to do it several times versus Oldhim. Tunic can probably get you 3 to 4 resources over the course of an Oldhim game. And utilizing those correctly and effectively is a key to winning that matchup. It's probably one of the tougher matchups for the deck. And Tunic is ultimately there for that matchup.
And you were mentioning before we started that this is, and you've said it already, this is an aggro deck, and it has a very specific play pattern, and that's why you wanted me to separate the cards out like this. So let's run through this like portion of the main board, and we'll talk about why this portion is grouped the way it is.
Sure. Viserai is an aggro hero, and you have a sort of the start core game plan, which is you're going to play a non-attack that lets an attack gain go again that wouldn't have it, and then you're going to play your attack that now has go again, and then you're going to swing the Thorn. And that's like the basis of every Viserai hand for the most part.
Sure.
And that's your standard 3-card hand. You have a blue pitch card. The vast majority of your attacks cost 2. So you pitch your blue for your attack. You play the Modern Skies first. And then you attack and you swing Thorn. That's a 3-card hand. And then that other pile that's on the playmat, those are what I call the extenders, and we can go more into them later. But those are cards that very easily get inserted into these otherwise standard 4/3 card hands. So Mauvrion Skies is probably the core of the deck at this point.
For sure.
You play 9 of them, all 3 colors, and it is primarily important because it just says your next Runeblade attack gets go again. And so you can give Spellblade Assault, you can give Shrill Skullform, Amplify the Arknight sometimes, you can give them go again. Lets you do that, lets you swing your Thorn.
It's the reason the deck does that exact play pattern. You play 9 of these things.
Play 9.
And you just do your thing, right? I mean, it literally it allows you to make that play pattern you described, along with these blue lead the charges as well, right?
Yeah, so blue lead the charge is interesting. I'll throw the number out here too. The deck is playing 22 blues. One of those is the Arknight shard, so sometimes you have 21, but that's your blue count. It's you want 1 blue every turn. There's some hands that function without a blue pitch, but for the most part, you need 1 to like fuel your turn. But it's good when you can play these blues that actually serve double duty. Blue lead the charge is an interesting spot because the way lead the charge scales is the cost required on the card you play goes up. But most of your attacks cost 2 or more anyway. So blue lead the charge is functionally no different from a red lead the charge. So we have 12 main board cards that can grant go again, and that's the 9 Mauve Skies and the 3 blue leads.
So that whole stack is basically just playing into your game plan of give a Runeblade attack go again so that you can follow it up with Thorn for 2 and 2, right?
Yep. And that's what you're looking to do every turn. And then get into the attacks. You have a base core, and it's the 3 red Spellblade Assaults, and then there's also 2 red Amplify the Arknights and 2 red Shrill Skullform.
Yep.
And these are they're good attacks, but they don't have go again, so we're going to give them go again.
Why 2 of the Shrills and of the Amplify the Arknights?
We had arrived at trying to fit 3 of each of these is weird, and Amplify the Arknight specifically costing 3 as a base means it's more awkward. 2 amplifies is because red Shrill is not a 6 power attack for the purposes of illusionists, and amplify is.
Ooh, that's a great point.
And so I think that's why this breakdown has felt the most comfortable. 8 cards in my sideboard, there are 6+ base power attacks, and so those plus the amplifies mean I can just be playing 10, and like most of the time they throw a herald at me and I can just stop it.
That's a really, really good point. I did not even consider that.
There's a whole pile of blue attacks here. Most of your blue base is attacks, and you have blue versions of things like Spellblade Assault and Shrill Skullform. The one unique sort of call out here is the Vexing Malices. You play 3 blue Vexing Malice. It's a solid, it blocks for 3. It's a blue pitch. It's everything you want, like a blue resource card, and it has the additional benefit that your opponent is at 1 life and they don't have AB2. You don't even need to activate the Thorn. That's the common one, right?
Yeah.
You get them to 1 with AB1 only. If you draw a hand that activates Rosetta Thorn, like you just win. Vexing Malice, it's even easier. Just toss it out there and they lose.
In the back, you have 2 Spellblade Strikes and then exactly one Dread Triptych, which is an interesting addition.
Yeah.
It's just the one of, right?
So we got 1 Triptych. You potentially could play more than 1 Triptych instead of the Spellblade Strikes. You could play the full 3 if you really wanted to. Dread Triptych, I think, got trimmed to 1 just because it does cost 3. It's awkward to find lines of play to really get it out. But especially if you play a Mordred Tide, this thing can make a ton of rune chance.
That is very true. There's a really big high roll involved in this if you get a Mordred Tide and you can play this.
I didn't get to do this to anyone in the Battle Hardened, but one potential line of play that you can do is if you have your normal, you play your Mauvrion Skies, you play your other attack, you usually have the 1 resource left over that you'd use on your Thorn. But if you have another blue and your full turn looks like Mordred Tide, Mauvrion Skies attack, you can actually use your Ironweave to get the other 2 resources and just send this at the end, because that's probably like 6 rune chance. Because you got your Viserai trigger, you've got the non-attack line of text here and the arcane damage, and it's threatening a hit trigger. This thing can leave a ton of rune chance left over, so that's why we play the 1. But again, at 3, it's awkward the vast majority of the time. It's usually the card you pitch. So
yeah, this sort of sums up your core idea with the gameplay of Viserai and in aggro is play this stack of cards right here, give go again to an attack, come in with that attack, and then swing the thorn after, right?
Yep. And that is the basis for what you want basically every turn to look like when you're playing this deck.
And you talked about this pile being what you call extenders, which I think is a really cool idea to consider it that way. And you said this is basically just like cards that allow your turn to go from that base to something kind of crazy, right?
Yep, they're the cards that at the base level take a standard threatening 12 damage turn of Modern Sky's Red Shrill Thorn into now it's 17, now it's 20, those types of things. And so I'll start at Rune Flash. This is actually one, they asked me, they gave us a top 8 questionnaire. One of the questions was, what's the best card in your deck? I put Rune Flash, which, that's debatable whether that's actually true, but I love this card. I think Rune Flash is sick. The way to think about it is it's a card that it just has go again, right? There's no conditions. It's a 4 physical go again, but it gets its cost reduced. So the vast majority of the time when you're playing it, it's 0 for 4 go again, which is like, that's on rate, right? Technically it's above rate.
It's above rate, yeah.
Go again 4, should be, yeah. But it's then, again, Viserai, it's even more above rate because it's actually 0 for 5 go again because you're getting the rune chant off of it, usually.
That's a very good point.
This is one of those cards you can insert it into. The common line of play is a 4-card hand where you go Modern Sky's Spellblade Assault. Now you can Rune Flash after that Spellblade Assault before you swing the Thorn. Now you're just adding 5 damage to that turn. It's also any attack, you get to Revel after that attack. Now you can play your Rune Flash.
That's true.
So Rune Flash and Swarming Gloomveil are the 6 cards in this pile. They're the attacks that they get go again naturally, and so you get to sort of throw them into your standard game plan Mob Sky's attack turns to make them even wider, even more damage. Become the Arcanite's a weird card. The reason it's a weird card is that I think probably 90% of the time when you draw this in your hand, it's you should pitch it. You're not trying to play it. It's kind of like Spellbound Creepers in that way. It's a safety valve that can fix weird hands, but a lot of the times, again, you have this core game plan, non-attack that gives go again, attack. The deck is good at consistently drawing those types of hands, and a lot of times you don't need Become the Arcanite to fix it. It's also great because when you go first, you can use it to go get a Read the Runes and just start the game with 4 rune chants in play. Or 5 if you have another card to pitch to your grasp.
That's a really good point too. That's a good way to think about it, like a safety valve.
Now,
this is an MVP right here.
This is the classic, right? This is the classic, like, I'm taking this turn and cranking it to 11. Mordred-Tide on a Revel and Runeblood turn is worth 5 damage, which is crazy for a 0-cost non-attack action. It usually is adding closer to 3, but it does. I actually didn't talk about this when we were talking about Modern Skies. One of the important things with Modern Skies is that you care about it because it gives go again. But it does add a hit trigger to create rune chance. If you play a Mordred-Tide first, now they really want to block. So yeah, this is a great card. It's an easy, like, you can just throw it in at the start of the turn, and now you're getting like 3 to 5 more damage on the turn that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
Speaking of Revel and Runeblood,
here
Revel and Runeblood here is a 3 of in the deck, as you see.
Yep. This card is certainly a lot of people say that this is potentially too good. And again, in Viserai, it's 0 for 5 with go again. And it's usually coming in with your Rosetta Thorn, but it can enable you to like play and amplify the Arcanite. It can enable you to play your Rune Flash. This is really like, if Mordred-Tide's turning the turn to 11, Revel and Runeblood's turning the turn to 12.
Now, a card that I did consider actually messing around with and dropping and trimming is Sonata Arcanix, but you run 3 of, right?
I run 3. I think Sonata is probably the worst card in this pile of extenders. I'm going to make this point now because it's relevant for Revel and Runeblood as well. I think Revel and Runeblood and Sonata Arcanix are probably the 2 cards in the deck that are the best targets for you want to use them with your Creeper. With the way I've set up this specific list. The best example I can give is if you have like Mordred-Tide, you have a pitch card, you have the attack you want to play, and you have a Revel or a Sonata, but you don't have the go again thing. That's where you're looking at like, oh, you can Mordred-Tide, you can play your attack, you can activate your spell on creepers, for Rebel or for Sonata, get your action point back. It at least lets you swing the Thorn. Like, its base case is it's 1 damage because you played at the start of your turn, and now your next Runeblade card is making a rune chant off of Viserai trigger that otherwise wouldn't have made a rune chant. So the Sonata got you 1 damage there.
Yeah.
But when it draws a card, now you're looking at, it's 2 damage and it drew a card. What card that draws, like, is really hard to evaluate exactly how much it's worth. But I can give an example of the sort of things it enables. Quarterfinals match. I went first and I did the Become Read, started the game with 4 rune chants. And then my next turn, I played Sonata right off the start, and it drew me a Rune Flash. And I was able to go play the Rune Flash, because I had the 4 rune chants already, and then close the combat chain, Rattle Bones, targeting the Rune Flash, Revel in Runeblood, Rune Flash again, Thorn Swing. And that was a 4-card hand that was worth technically 21 damage. It was 25 damage on that turn before that was from the read. And so that's like the top end of this, right? Sure. Sometimes Sonata Arcanus just completely bails you out of a hand that's otherwise like not great. Just don't ever pitch into this card unless your opponent lets you. If you pitch into Sonata, it reveals 4 attacks. You don't get any cards. The line of play you can do is like nothing.
Yep.
That's where I think people get caught.
Basically, just do it with advantage. If you have advantage in the turn cycle.
If you have advantage, you hit your opponent with like a 20+ damage turn. They're either just passing or maybe they're arsenal passing, and you draw like 2 blues. That's usually where you're looking to pitch in this. I would not play around pitching into this. Just think of it as like a cantrip. So the last card that's in sort of the main extenders package here is the Rattle Bones. The number 1 use case for this is 1 Rattle Bones and a blue pitch card is 2 cards to present 8 damage, assuming you have a Swarming Gloom Veil in your graveyard. Because you get to play the Rattle Bones targeting the Swarming, play the Swarming for 3 with Go Again, because your Viserai trigger gets you the aura that gives the Swarming Go Again, and then you Thorn for 5, it's 8 total damage, right? That's completely on rate. That's a great turn off 2 cards. I talked about it too. I had a 25 damage turn because I played a Rune Flash twice using Rattle Bones. So it has a lot of top end. It has a really good floor, but they are bad in multiples. So we trimmed it to 2.
So 2 makes a ton of sense.
Yep.
And then we get to the card that I really enjoyed sleeving up because I always love dusting off the Arcanite Shard.
Yeah. So this Arcanite Shard is the Fable. It was in Crucible War. It's a legendary Viserai specialization. This card, so the first point, if you do not own Arcanite Shard, do not
go
feel
buy
like
it.
you need
go
to
buy
spend...
it right now. Go to TCG Player. No, don't buy it.
Do not feel like this is the last thing. If you're trying to build a Viserai deck, and you don't own this, this is absolutely 100% the last card that you should buy to complete this deck. I'd argue even probably you could just start foiling out other cards before you buy this card. This is absolutely not required. It does have 1 line of play that it does enable. And that's, you can keep a 2-card hand and pitch this to play Red Shrill, and that's 7 damage.
That's a good play, man.
Plus the 1 from the Arcanite. It's on range. It's a great play, but it's absolutely not required. And then so if you do have an Arcanite Shard and you're looking to play this deck, the way that I think about Arcanite Shard in this deck is it is the 22nd blue, and it is in the deck when I'm not concerned about getting caught with a no block in my hand. So there's a couple matchups. The primary ones are Lexi and Bravo, where I really don't want to like kind of get screwed over because I got caught with like the only blue in my hand was a no block, or just having a no block in my hand like messes me up. So there's a couple matchups where it stays out. Again, Lexi, Bravo are probably the primary 2. I would play it versus Oldhim because they don't threaten your life total nearly as much, and you want the extra power it provides. And then the additional sort of thing there, I don't not board in a different card to play the Arcanite Shard. When I play the Arcanite Shard, it's just the 61st card.
Okay.
And that's the way I was doing it. So I played a couple Bravos at Portland where it wasn't in, but like every other matchup, I'm just presenting 61.
And then finally, you have 2 really fun cards, a red Read the Runes and then a red Runeblood Incantation. You want to talk about those really quick?
Yeah, so these were listed as sideboard cards, but I pulled them out here, put them in because the way this works is you're always playing one of these. And the decision for which one is whether you're going first or second. Because if you're going first, getting that red Read the Runes on as a turn 1 play, that's like the ideal turn 1 play for a Viserai. Is you just get to make some damage on the board, but you're not actually letting them. You're not attacking them there when it like they get to block it for free. You're not letting them filter their hand. But when you're on the draw, and you're gonna go second, that's when you play the incantation, read the runes. Obviously, it's a terminated action. It doesn't have go again. So you need spellbound creepers if you want to utilize it in the middle of a turn. So if you're going second, you play Runeblade Incantation instead. This was one of the last changes we made to the deck, was actually cutting down to 1 of Incantation. A lot of people run 2 or 3. I'll be honest, I haven't done a ton of work just yet, but it's one of those things I want to reevaluate to try to find a slot for, I think, a second, because I was only playing the 1, but thinking back on the matches, man, when I had it in the deck, I kept drawing it and it kept being real good. So
card's good, man. I
may go up to 2, and who knows how much longer this matchup will be relevant. But if you're playing against Prism, you play the incantation all the time. You do not want to read the runes if you go first, because that's when you play the read the runes and go, great, here's Genesis, and then I'll draw 4 cards. So you play incant all the time versus Prism. Every other matchup, whether it's incant or read the runes, depends on whether you go first or second.
So this makes up what is essentially your main board. It's got your game plan of playing non-attacks that give go again, the attacks that follow that, along with a thorn swing. Of course, pitching a blue as sort of your cost basis. And then everything in this deck literally just makes that game plan more dangerous and allows you to really just do Viserai and Runeblade things. So from this point, let's jump into what your sideboard is and talk about your sideboard, because I would describe your sideboard as well, I guess like extensive as far as what you're thinking of. Basically what I saw on paper. There's a lot of different switching and moving parts, and I think that's really interesting. So I want to dive into that pretty heavy. All right, so let's talk about the sideboard here. We've split it into 3 groups, as that's kind of what you talked me through just now. And I guess the best place to start is on the left, because that's what people like to see. So this is a group of cards that all cost 2 or greater, and that all explode things if blocked with. Basically.
So you have 8. We have these 8 attacks. It's 3 CNCs, Command and Conquers, 3 Runic Reclamations, and then 2 Erase Face. Runic Reclamation is great versus Illusionists. It's obviously incredible versus Prism because it breaks their phantasms, but if you actually attack with it, it threatens their auras. So this is good there, but it's actually it's good in matchups that you like sort of wouldn't think it's good in.
It really is.
I bring it in, so you bring it in versus Briar. I'm actually realizing now I didn't have to play against Briar at Portland, but you bring it in versus Briar, and the way to play this is you find one and just arsenal it, and then play 4-card hands from there. As soon as they play CMH, you just send this at them, and it just it completely messes with everything that they want to do. It is also, funnily enough, it's good into Icelander.
It is, yes, it is. It's very good.
It doesn't hit Frost Hex and it doesn't hit Hypothermia, but what it does hit is Insidious Chill. And it costs 4 if it's out, but you can do the same thing to Channel Lake Frigid.
Yes.
Command and Conquer is a house, right? I think we all know that at this point. If you're new to the game, then here's your introduction. This card is a house. It does sort of double duty. Command and Conquer is a great card for when you have a weird, awkward hand that like doesn't do anything. Just keep your blue, keep your CNC, throw it at them, and they're like, I don't want to block this. But it's also, this card is incredible to use Aether Ironweave to like end your combat chain on. Command and Conquer tends to come in into aggro mirrors, like anyone where you just like you want to strip cards from them. It's also really good into Bravo. They tend to arsenal their big crush effects that they want to hit you with that'll slow you down. And when they have to, at the very least, it usually means like sending CNC at them means like, oh, I have to block this with cards, and now I can't cripple crush. I gotta wait till next.
Yes.
The last one is Erase Face, which we're playing 2 copies instead of the full 3. It's a really powerful effect. It's incredible into Prism, serving double duty as it's a popper, but also if they take it, like their heralds don't get go again, their auras don't get go again.
Yeah,
it's great there. It is a incredible attack in the Viserai mirror, because Modern Skies says Runeblade attack, and Erase Face makes them not Runeblade attacks.
So my question for you here is, with this package, do they all come in like one group? I know you mentioned these come in specific matchups, but there's a good number of overlap of what you mentioned.
There's obviously a good number of overlap. It does It varies. Prism is the one you just pick up all 8 of these cards, jam it in the deck, and you're like, we're good. Like Dromai, for example, though, I don't bring in the Runics. I just bring in the Erase Faces and the CNCs. In aggro mirrors, it kind of depends on like, is the hit effect good, right? So CNC is great into basically every aggro deck because it's pretty much guaranteed to get a card. Erase Face, again, it depends on the hero you're playing. It's good into Prism, it's good into Viserai Mirror, but Fi can sometimes ignore it. Briar can probably ignore an Erase Face. So yeah, it kind of varies. You usually bring in some of these in every matchup though, and it's like you're probably starting at Command and Conquer,
and then working your way towards
like is Runic useful here? Is Erase Face useful here?
Do you want to talk to me about this middle pile, because it's literally just 3 consuming volitions and
it's 3 consuming volitions, 3 meet and greets. I sort of put them in a separate pile from the other ones because they are attacks that cost 1, and so consuming volition and meet and greet more so occupy the space of like, this is an extender on a turn, in addition to your Mauvrion Sky's Spellblade Assault. Consuming Volition specifically is primarily for aggro matchups. Again, it's good in the Viserai Mirror, it's good into Fi, it's good into Briar, those types of matchups. You bring it in the aggro matchups to be that sort of like tempo breaker card.
It's a card that it literally just asks someone to interact with you.
And yeah, it forces them to interact with you. It's the type of card that makes it so you can play your 5-card hand, and your opponent's sitting there like, well, that's a nice 5-card hand, but I have a 5-card hand, and I'm going to send it at you. And you end with this, and they're like, oh, wait a second.
Because the interaction could be that they're literally just discarding a card and they're losing a card. So it becomes this situation where they're like, okay, I either lose a card or I block and try to save some life. But either way, I can't play out this bigger turn.
And then Meet and Greet is the other card. And this card it's a 1-for-4 that can give itself go again. So it fits into that extender package. It's something you get to do in addition to the rest of your normal turn. It's also really good in aggro matchups. So it's threatening to be a 1-for-5 if they don't block it. And it's a 4. It's on a weird breakpoint. It's not easy to block up cleanly. I don't bring in Consuming Volition or Meet and Greet into Prism because I'm using the sideboard slots to bring in all 8 of those 6-power popper attacks. But Meet and Greet's the type of card that's like actually sneakily good into Dromai. They have a decent number of dragons that will just die to Meet and Greet, and you get to send it at the dragon and like get the rune chant on hit. So these again, Consuming Volition and Meet and Greet, they're both good in aggro matchups, but they're not necessarily tied together. You can get flexible when you bring them in.
And then finally, you have this stack over here, which is literally just 2 red unmovables.
2 red unmovables, 2 yellow leads. Yep. So these are probably the most specific cards in the sideboard. Unmovable is a concession to the Bravo matchup. This was another one of the late additions. It helps that matchup a ton because they are not... Bravo Showstopper is not trying to block you out. Not in the way Olden is. But when they draw Crippling Crush, like they can't, you just throw too much damage at them. They can't survive like blocking with 4 or 5 cards every turn. So they will try to Crippling Crush you. They'll try to Final Crush you. And those are big, powerful attacks that are very disruptive. Unmovable lets you just blunt that type of aggression from them. Armor plus a card stops that first Crippling or Spinal. Unmovable from Arsenal stops the second. And your hope is that they're dead before they get a third one.
Yeah, right. That's a good way to look at it. Finally, lead the charge. Yellow, lead the charges.
So this is another late addition. The way I was sideboarding it for Portland is that it was specifically the Prism matchup, and I was taking out 2 red Mauvrion Skies and replacing them with yellow lead the charges. If you need to, the game's gone horribly off the rails from your game plan's perspective, and you're staring down 4 auras. Yellow lead into an attack, into a Thorn Swing, clears 2 Spectres off the board. Yellow lead can give something like Erase Face or CNC go again, along with the blue leads. And you're playing more of those. The third bit is sometimes you just want to pitch this because you're boarding in a bunch of expensive attacks. And like you have a line where you just want to play that attack instead. I think there's room to explore with this card in terms of just bringing it in and not cutting the red skies to go up to like 14 non-attacks that can give go again. But I was not doing that for Portland. I was staying on 12 go again sources in the deck.
Overall, your sideboard, when you kind of explain it out, the cards are very thoughtfully considered and put into this sideboard. How many of these cards do you have to bring in to get to 60? I think do you have like a 52 card main board? Is that what it is?
Yeah, so because again, the Runeblade Incantation and the Read the Runes sort of occupy one slot, where the card you play is based on whether you go first or second. That's
Sure.
the sort of the 50-second card in the main board. You need to bring in 8 cards to get to 60. And
Gotcha.
again, Arknight Shard excluded. I'm playing that as the 61st card. So yeah, I think most matchups, it's basically you're just grabbing 8 attacks and you grab like the best 8 attacks for that matchup. Or the way I operate with my physical deck is anything that is not in the main board in 100% of matchups, I pull out into a stack of sideboard cards. So that
Sure.
way I only have to think about what cards do I bring in. Part of that section was actually the red amps and the red shrills were sideboarded because I didn't bring them in 100% of matchups. Five's one of those because you can kind of like take out like the amplifies, keep the shrills in, and you get to run like the 3 CNCs, the 3 meet and greets, and the 3 consumings, and then like an erase face. Those sorts of sideboarding plans like that are a lot more fungible. I certainly don't feel like I've solved it yet. There's plenty of room to expand on like what combination of attacks you want in certain matchups. But generally speaking, just sort of look at these, think about like which 8 of these do I want in this matchup, and bring those in. And then you think about, do I want the Arknight Shard? You bring that in. That gets you to your 60 or 61.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is your deck. It's your main board. It's your sideboard. It's how you view the matchups.
Yeah, and I think just in general, Viserai is pretty favored, or at least even with most of the fields. This is with Portland, again, we kind of expected a lot of prisms, but otherwise it was pretty open. People didn't really know how good is Fi, like how good is Briar, what's the best Runeblade. A lot of questions. It was a fairly even distribution overall in terms of the matchup, like or the meta spread. And I think he's good into most everything that you're going to run into.
I think, and that's a good reason why people should consider picking it up. And so, like, if you're watching this and you're a new player and you're thinking about different heroes that you want to pick up long term, I think Viserai is a great option for that. Because he's an aggro deck, he's, I think, more apt to just picking up an understanding, because your goal is to just push their life total down. It's not something, you know, building a board state or defending out and like that sort of thing. And you add in the fact that, one, he's aesthetically really cool looking, and he also just has a lot of play into a lot of different heroes because he can do a lot of things. This is a great hero to try and pick up and get good with. And he does reward you for being very good and very experienced in knowing the play lines. And sometimes those lines are a little bit more difficult to see, but if you can figure it out, and hopefully with this video you might start to piece it together, then he's very, very rewarding.
Yep, you start at the floor of, I'm going to play my Modern Skies, I'm going to play my 2+ attack, I'm going to swing my Thorn.
Yep.
And that's very easy to grok, very easy to pick up. That's your base play. And then you get to the really complicated, oh, but if I can use Spellbound Creepers here to like make a 25 damage turn. And that's where deck experience can really come into play.
Man, I really appreciate you hopping on and sharing this with us and kind of walking us through how you thought about it, how you built it. I hope people got something out of it. I hope you enjoyed the video if you enjoyed watching it. If you did, feel free to leave a comment for me or Dexter down in the comments section about the deck. If you want more info on the deck, you can find his list in the description, as well as a link to the Patreon where I've got some write-ups for it as well. If you enjoyed it, make a number, do another thing, and climb slightly higher. That'd be sick. And as always, thanks for watching.